Social Stories and Interactive Teaching Procedures, Students with Cognitive Disabilities. Hi, I'm Alicia Schaben, and I'm a graduate student at Morningside University. I am also a special education teacher at Clarion Goldfield Dow's High School. The problem statement within the research is that there is a lack of learning intervention supports for students with cognitive disabilities other than for those with autism spectrum disorder, also known as ASD. I believe that instilling independence and knowledge of social skills into adolescents with cognitive disabilities who may need many supports remain a challenging factor for many educators. There is limited exploration on effective instructional strategies for all students with cognitive disabilities. I chose this topic because I believe I and other special education teachers find it difficult to find resources and interventions that are deemed successful and consistent for students with cognitive disabilities. When I research interventions for students with cognitive disabilities, majority of the information found is centered on lessons for students with ASD. These interventions focusing on ASD never mention the use of the interventions for other students with other types of cognitive disabilities. I wanted to find out that if interventions that were used and designed only for those with ASD would also stand to be successful for students with other kinds of cognitive disabilities. Samuels and Sandfield's research on the effectiveness of social stories to develop social interactions with adults with characteristics of autism spectrum disorder studied the effectiveness of social stories on adults with ASD, and researchers measured inappropriate behaviors and social skills using multiple baseline assessments for 2 weeks. Following the baseline behavior data analysis that was collected, social stories were developed for each of the 4 participants with their individual service facility providers. And during a 2-week intervention phase, participants read social stories with support staff. After the intervention phase was conducted, researchers began the fading phase for 2 weeks. After the 2-week fading phase, participants were able to keep their social stories for their own individual use, but researchers no longer recommended or prompted the participants to read them. Lastly, in a 4-week fading phase, researchers followed up with the 4 participants for 1 week to conduct the follow-up probe to examine the upkeep of the targeted skills. After conducting the study, researchers Samuels and Stanfield found that the social story intervention proved to be successful in developing appropriate communication and behavior social skills. The researchers recommend and suggest that further research be conducted with adjustments made to the time and length of the intervention. In addition, researchers suggest including other individuals with learning disabilities in their study. In Kasarjan's research comparing teaching interaction procedures to social stories, participants diagnosed with autism took part in an intervention studying the effect of teaching interaction procedures versus the effect of social stories. In the research, 3 social skill interventions were studied. Each student was taught social skills through a teaching interaction procedure, which consisted of a teacher using dictated questions, teacher-led demonstration, and role play. Additionally, each student was taught social skills through a social story intervention, which consisted of reading a story and answering comprehension questions. The study was composed of 3 phases consisting of a baseline, intervention, and continuation for both teaching interaction procedures and the social story intervention. The result of the study measured and displayed that the teaching interaction procedure was more effective than the social story intervention for all 3 participants. The researchers suggest and encourage further studies and researchers to continue to compare other forms of social skill interventions. The purpose of the study was to determine if interactive teaching procedures and social stories are beneficial for all students with cognitive disabilities, not just for those with ASD. The researcher hypothesized that interactive teaching procedures and social story interventions will help teach social skills to students with ASD, as well as to students with cerebral palsy and intellectual disabilities. In the methodology section, I will talk about the participants, materials, variables, impact, procedure, and data analysis. Participants included high school students in a life skill special education classroom. Only students with varying cognitive disabilities were selected. There were 4 Caucasian females with cognitive disabilities, 2 whom were 16 and 2 whom were 18. Materials used were a MacBook Pro, Microsoft Word, Boardmaker, PowerPoint, pragmatic checklists, lesson plans, social skill rubrics, iBook app, social stories, manila folders, popsicle sticks, note cards, comprehension questions, coloring pages, a 70-page 3-ring notebook, and stickers. The research variables include the independent variable of social stories and interactive teaching procedures, and a dependent variable of a pragmatic checklist. Possible impact of the research includes the results of the study, which can be used to help educators teach social and behavioral skills to students with cognitive disabilities. My work as an educator will be impacted by whether or not I continue to use social stories and interactive teaching procedures as interventions and how I select social skills in the future. For the first 6 weeks of my research, interactive teaching procedures were conducted. In week 1, a baseline data was collected using a pragmatic checklist. In weeks 2 and 3, procedures focused on greeting others. Weeks 4 and 5, procedures focused on asking for help. In week 6, a maintenance phase occurred where participants were expected to continue to display the targeted behavior through role play, but were no longer conducted interventions or supports throughout the maintenance phase. For the next 5 weeks of the research, social story interventions were conducted. In week 7, a pragmatic checklist was used to assess skills. In weeks 8 and 9, social stories focused on listening to others. In weeks 9 and 10, social story interventions focused on communication basics. Finally, throughout a 1-week maintenance phase during weeks 12, the participants were expected to continue to model their social skill through role-playing. Participants were assessed through observation while using the targeted skills social skill rubric. Furthermore, throughout the maintenance phase, the participants still had access to the social stories, but the researcher no longer enforced the participants to read the social story or have the story read to them. The data analysis showed that participants were assessed observationally, rubrics were used to progress monitor growth, progress was monitored every week, and data was analyzed at the conclusion of the 12-week intervention using a pragmatic checklist. Next, we will talk about the results. The results of the study confirmed the researcher's hypothesis that interactive teaching procedures and social story interventions help teach social skills to students with ASD, as well as to students with cerebral palsy and intellectual disabilities. There was a statistically significant increase in the students' social skill scores as a result of the social story and interactive teaching procedures. Here you can see in the graph that all students showed growth. There was an initial mean score of 56.75% and an end mean score of 72.25%. These results suggest that interactive teaching procedures and social stories positively affect social skills in students with cognitive disabilities. Specifically, the results suggest that when students use interactive teaching procedures or social stories to learn social skills, the less inappropriate behaviors occur. The post-test mean score was 15% greater than the pre-test score. This support is shown through the post-test mean result table. Findings in the research support the constructivist theory and the researcher's hypothesis. These results confirm the researcher's hypothesis that interactive teaching procedures and social stories positively affect social skills in students with cognitive disabilities. The research shows that when students with cognitive disabilities are taught social skills through social stories and interactive teaching procedures, learning and mastery of the content was achieved. Theorists who focus on social constructivism believe that children learn and master skills by external scaffolding supports. These supports include chunking tasks into understandable modules, modeling, coaching, and offering feedback. My research results mesh well with past research and supports Vygotsky's theory of social constructivism. The results of the research attest that when students use interactive teaching procedures or social stories to learn social skills, the less inappropriate social behaviors occur. Within the research, the post-test results mean score was 15% greater than the pre-test score, showing that there was a significant difference in the scores. The use of social stories and interactive teaching procedures positively impact the participants by providing a first person's context to the content being learned. The participants are able to better understand new skills in the future using social stories and interactive teaching procedures. Interventions provided the participants to be exposed to vocabulary presented to them in a more meaningful context. The use of social stories and interactive teaching procedures positively impact teachers by providing them with the resource to teach social skills to students with various cognitive disabilities, create less disruptive behaviors in the school setting, and provide more learning time in the classroom. The use of social stories and interactive teaching procedures positively impact parents by providing them with a resource to use within their own home. Parents can utilize a social story and interactive teaching procedure interventions within their own home and community to teach their child social, procedural, and behavior skills. Parents and teachers have the opportunity to collaborate and create additional learning opportunities for the students within their own home and community environments. Lastly, learning procedures within the home and community will be consistent to that of the learning procedures in the school environment. Within the research, there were 3 limitations. The first limitation was a small sample size. Only four students participated in the study. The second limitation was that only students with autism, intellectual disabilities, and cerebral palsy were included in the study. The third limitation was the length of the study. The researcher found that 12 weeks was not long enough of a time frame to conduct the interventions. Future research should teach specific skills for longer periods of time. Due to having a small sample size, having additional classes or participants would yield more data. Lastly, the study should not only focus on participants with cerebral palsy, intellectual disabilities, and ASD, but as well as other types of cognitive disabilities, such as Down syndrome, dementia, attention deficit disorder, dyslexia, dyscalculia, and learning disabilities in general. I want to take this time to thank you and for listening to my presentation. I greatly enjoyed conducting my research, and I hope you enjoyed learning about it too. Thank you.